life writes the story for us through loss, through unexpected turns, through moments we'd give anything to rewrite. But in those very chapters, we often find the threads that shape our voice and our truth. Welcome back, listeners, to the Mindful Journey podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and today we are joined by someone who has lived through history and personal heartbreak. Reporting from the White House, standing in the middle of riots, and enduring the unimaginable grief of losing loved ones. And yet, he has transformed those experiences into fiction that carries both grit and grace. His 6 political thrillers are not just stories on a page, but they are echoes of lived experience, journalism, grief, and resilience woven together. So, listeners, I am honored to welcome my guest, John DeDakis, who reminds us that writing can be more than craft. It can be survival. It can be a way to hold on and a way to let go. So, John, welcome to the show. And as always, it is such an honor to have you here with us.
Hello, Sana. It's good to be with you again.
Super, super. Um, you know, John, let's start with your journey with journalism and then grief. I mean, your bio, it speaks to journalism and grief being the backdrop your fiction. Um, how did those two very different worlds, like reporting facts and then processing loss, come together in your writing?
The journalism experience started a long time ago during the Vietnam War when I decided to go into journalism instead of going into law and politics. And
Mhm.
journalism, by nature, almost by definition, you're going to be covering things that are traumatic. I mean, you come across people on the worst day of their life. But
Mm.
um, back then, I wasn't really thinking of writing fiction. That came much later. But even when I started writing fiction, my life had already experienced, a couple of painful and traumatic experiences. I witnessed a car train collision that killed 3 people when I was 9 years old, and
Okay.
my older sister, died of suicide in 1980, and so.
Mhm.
When I started writing fiction, I basically took those 2 experiences and started a story that has been going on now for 20 years and 6 books. And so you take those painful experiences and
Mhm.
use them to craft stories, but the byproduct is that it's cathartic and therapeutic
Mm.
to do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we um discussed it previously in the mindful living as well. I mean, how cathartic it can be, how therapeutic can be in your experience writing. And I can imagine listeners might see journalism as distant and objective, but then um grief, it really makes it deeply personal. And now, John, I'm really personally very curious to know, because you have spent like 45 years in journalism. So when you look back, um it like could be difficult one, but still, what part of that journey most shaped the way you see the world now?
Oh my. How I see the
Mm.
world. How do I see the world now? Let me think about that. Um, I suppose you could say my spiritual journey has evolved, and I use spiritual journey because I think that there's something transcendent. There's something beyond us
Mhm.
that helps to give life meaning and purpose. And that has been a lifelong experience in trying to understand that. I was raised in the Episcopal Church, which is similar to Catholicism, same rituals, not as much guilt. And I had an experience as an evangelical Christian, which brought a lot of stability to my life. But in looking back, it also brought some degree of legalism and rigidity to my life as well. And so after my son died about 14 years ago, I began to reevaluate my spirituality again. And I've moved into an area and a way of thinking that's less doctrinaire. And it's much more in tune with, just a spirituality that is
Mm,
less concerned with rituals and dogma and things like that, and more interested in a way of living, in a way of seeing, in a way of being in touch with the divine, and at the same time influencing my relationships with other people so that the focus is on others and not just on myself. So the that's been an evolution, and I think that has worked itself out in my writing as well. I mean, as a journalist, you're just the facts. You're just dealing with, what the story is, what the facts are. And when I
mhm,
started writing fiction, that meant dealing with more personal, painful experiences. And
mm,
usually, when a person goes through painful experiences, there's a certain degree of deep questions about meaning and what's it all about and what's the purpose and all those kinds of things. And so there was a certain degree of spiritual reevaluation that was going on then. And so I guess it's a long answer, but I've lived a long time. And so I've been trying as I've been living to make sense of things. And as you make sense of life, that has an impact on how you live life. And because I'm a writer, it also has impacted my writing. And so it's hard to, give you a pat answer other
mm,
than I think that there's been a connection between spirituality and living life in the here and now.
mm.
Feel free to follow up.
Yeah, definitely. And the one question which comes to my mind, it can be a bit of a not opinionated, but really hard to define. But before that, I must say, God bless you, John. And yeah, I mean that's such a pivotal shift, and it sometimes really, sparks so many questions within us, questioning the way of living, questioning belief systems, thinking, uh, anything. I mean, it's kind of sometimes very hard to establish a connection between the external world and the kind of doldrums of thoughts going within us. So, John, have you ever like people define spirituality in different ways. For some of them it's connected with God, for some of them it's connected with their inner selves. Everybody has their own way of definition. So all it's completely different from the topic on which we are discussing, but how would you define spirituality? How would you define divine? If it's okay, or else we can skip.
No, that's a very good question. And I mean, I can only define it from, my limited perspective. Uh, it's it's almost ineffable in that it's hard to put words to it. I think it's so vast and mysterious that I think we only have just inklings of it. Some may be more astute or experienced in that. My experience of the divine is I think I've always known or always sensed that there was an intelligence behind the design, that there was a designer behind the design, because when you look at life, it's very intricate. And and that doesn't just happen. It's formed and shaped, and human beings are a product of that creation. Um So how do I define spirituality? I think it's a relationship. I think it's a relationship that is accessed in our deepest innermost being. And I think breath has a lot to do with it. I mean, breath is the essence of life. It is, I don't think we begin living until we take our first breath, and that animates us. And once we are animated and we are living, I think that it's wise to be in the moment and to be thoughtful about what is happening. Because I think in my experience, we spend a lot of time worrying about the past, or regretting the past and worrying about the future. And what I've learned over the last maybe 5 years since COVID, I think, is to be much more in tune with the moment, because it's the moment that you can control. And the way you become conscious of the moment is become conscious of your breathing, out with the bad, in with the good, inhale, exhale. And I think that when we slow down and become conscious of our breathing and the moment, I think that we are in a better position to center ourselves and position ourselves to be able to live forward mindfully, deliberately, thoughtfully, toward the next step in our life, one step at a time. Again, am I making any sense?
No, absolutely, absolutely, yes, John. And in defining spirituality, you actually shared the very essence of mindfulness. Completely the most fundamental, the crux of mindfulness. Why is it essential, especially during these? I would definitely call it as turbulent times, but it's kind of the you know beginning of something beautiful for the humanity. So yeah, thank you. I mean, this is really inspiring, very hopeful, very positive, practically positive. And with that, I'll move to the next question, because on this, I think we could go hours and hours, days and days discussing about it. So John, for your novel, first novel before it was published, it took you 10 years, 14 revisions, and 39 agent rejections, if I'm correct with the numbers. I
That's
mean,
right.
what did that decade teach you about persistence?
Well, it one of the things it taught me, it did teach me persistence, and one of the things I discovered as I was being persistent is that I was
Mhm.
applying myself to become a better writer, because I'd never written fiction before. My writing had been nonfiction, factual
Mm.
journalism, and so the more I applied myself to learning this new approach to writing, creative writing. I kept getting better because I was putting myself in a position where I would meet other people who were teachers, who were
Mhm.
more experienced and farther along in their process than I was. And I was learning from them, and I was seeing improvement in my writing, and I was getting positive feedback. I was getting critical feedback, but not the kind of feedback that would break your spirit. And so it enabled me to take the long view and to be willing to just keep trying and not give up. I don't think I expected that it was going to take 10 years to get the agent that I've got and to get published, but taking the long view paid off. And so I can look back on it and I can see the wisdom of not being impatient and using the time to get better at your craft, and eventually things will work out.
Mm. Yeah, I think that through this, there's such a meaningful lesson to be learned. Once again, I mean, somehow, if I believe that ties to you know presence, mindfulness, and not kind of judging, because through every maybe it's a good or bad experience, maybe it's a bad feedback, or maybe it's a constructive feedback. Through every fold and every event, there's something to be learned,
Right.
something to be learned, and then that definitely needs a lot of clarity and of course patience as well. Um, and John, your novel, a novels, it features strong young female protagonist, and we had discussed this in our previous conversation on the mindful living. That she kind of is a projection of your subconscious, maybe your feelings. So, I would like to know what part of yourself or your journey lives inside her.
Oh, a big part. I mean, obviously, I'm creating stories and I'm putting her in situations I've never been in. But
Mm,
I think what enables me to do that is that um, whenever you're in a situation, it creates emotions of one sort or another. And so, even though the situations are different, the emotions are the same. Emotions are universal. And so that enables me to write the character and have imagine how she would respond, how I would respond or might respond in a given situation. So the two kind of go hand in hand.
yeah, of course, of course. And I mean, that's how it must have been very, very therapeutic for you. Um, and you also coach others to use writing as healing. Um, but what if someone feels, like writing or reliving um, those memories or those events, especially harsh ones or traumatic ones, through words, through writing down, if they would keep them stuck in the past instead of moving forward, do you think, John, can writing ever become a trap?
I think it could, and I think that's actually an important caution to raise, even
Mm,
though it's my suggestion that writing can be healing and therapeutic. I think it's wise to point out that it's not for everybody. You know, there may be other ways that you can find healing.
mm,
Writing is one avenue, but it's not the only one. And I don't want to make a person feel as if, they're doomed to be stuck in this particular mindset and emotional cauldron if they don't do it my way. Because there are, I think having a conversation with a counselor can be a trained professional grief counselor. I think that can be therapeutic as well. Just being able to articulate your feelings to another person who can then reflect back what they're hearing and in an objective way get you thinking more concretely about how you're going to move forward in this situation. So writing isn't the only thing. I think facing the pain is important, no matter how you go about doing that, and it could be through art or music, poetry, those kinds of things. I think the
mm,
important thing, Sana, is to face things when you're ready. I mean, in the immediate moment, that's a pretty overwhelming experience. But,
mm.
unresolved grief can fester. Unresolved emotions of whatever type of emotions can fester and corrode. And so I think that somehow we need to be able to find a way to face the pain, mine it, understand it, and move forward.
Yeah, I think you really hit the right point in there, because healing is never one size fits all, or same for everyone. It's messy. It's mostly non-linear. So yeah.
Yes.
Mm,
Oh man, that's really true. And I've got an anecdote that I think underlines that point. Um, just a few weeks after my son died, my wife and I were in the car together, and we were listening to a CD on the radio or in the car. and a song came on, and my wife hit the button to advance it to the next track. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "Because every time I hear it, it makes me cry." It was the same song that when I heard it, I would hit repeat so that it would play over and over again because it made me cry. So it was the same song, same emotional reaction, but a different way of experiencing it. And that reminded me and actually came home true strongly to me that there's no one way to grieve, that grief has a different impact on people and there's no one right way or wrong way. It was just different.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that, John. It's quite an emotional one, and yes, you're absolutely right. Um, and I think that's the beauty, that's the uniqueness of, us as humans.
Right.
And before we wrap up, John, I think this is a bit. I feel if somebody would have asked me, I would have find it really tough to answer. But you have moved from journalism to fiction to coaching, and then you're also a keynote speaker now. Um, do you feel these transitions were truly choices you made, or were they forced on you by circumstances you couldn't control? I mean, if everything would have been just, or maybe your life had been a bit kinder, do you think you would still be a journalist today?
Oh, that's really hard to answer. I want to go back though. I want to go back to the way you phrased the question initially, and that was, am I doing things because they were forced on me? And I think the only thing that I could point to that was determined by ahead of time when I was born was whatever gifts and talents that I have. I think that, and I'm not a psychologist. I could be proven wrong, but I believe that personality is genetic to a certain extent. I think it's malleable as well, but I think we're born a certain way. I think we're born with certain aptitudes and abilities that, come easy for us. Foreign languages, very difficult for me. Math, forget about it. But I'm a communicator. I'm a writer. Words come easy for me. So I think that what I've done is I've been able to recognize what my strengths and the abilities are and get better at them and apply them. And I think the ultimate goal is to find what you're good at and what you love. And when you put those two things together, you really have purpose and propulsion going on. Would I still be I mean, I'm old now, so I've basically aged out of journalism. But I still pay attention to the news. I have opinions on the news. But I'm at a point now where I've retired from journalism, but the interesting thing is I've glided into a career as a one-on-one writing coach, a manuscript editor, a
Mhm.
novelist, a teacher. And these are things I really hope I'll be able to do until I die. I mean, and as long as I have the ability to do these things, I'm going to do them because it doesn't feel like work. It's part of my core person. And I think that at my core, I'm an encourager. I really want to be able to encourage people to meet their full potential.
Brilliantly put, John. Brilliantly put, and definitely, definitely comes from a place of self-awareness and clarity, and it really calls for you know a lot of self-introspection and understanding what are our strengths, what are our weakness, and then how we can become the better versions of ourselves, of
That's
course.
exactly it. That's exactly it.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant, John. So yeah, if our listeners they would like to connect with you and get a hold of your novel, what would be the best way?
Best way to get in touch with me would be through my website, which is my name.com, johndedakis.com, JOHN, D as in dog E, D as in dog A, DADAKIS as in Sam, johndedakis.com. It talks about all 6 of my books, my writing, my editing, my speaking, and there's a way to get a hold of me by email.
Brilliant. I'll make sure to have all the links for all of your listeners for easy reference. And as we close, I think what stays with me, John, is the reminder that stories aren't just for reading or readers; they are for writers as well, and they are a way of carrying what may feel unbearable. It's a way of stitching together facts and feelings into something that can finally breathe outside of us. So, thank you so much for being so candid and for giving us your words of inspiration, your messages of inspiration. So, thank you, John, once again.
You're welcome, and thank you, Sana.
Brilliant. And to all our beautiful, mindful listeners out there, maybe your story doesn't need to be perfect or published to matter. Maybe it just needs to be written because writing, like healing, is not about the finish line. It's about giving yourself permission to begin. And healing can be messy but beautiful. So, with that, I conclude this episode of The Mindful Journey. This has been your host, Sana. Thank you.